Welcome back, everyone, to another Hearts of Iron 4 Dev Diary. And this time we're going to be catching up on a few that I have left, I've left unattended for now. Obviously, the last 3 weeks I haven't done any videos on Dev Diaries because, I don't know, I didn't find them interesting at the time. I'm going to do them now. There's actually one that's very, very interesting. It's the naval changes, so I'm reserving that for last. So, first one is amphibious vehicles and research. So, essentially, they're adding amtraks, amphibious vehicles, and amphibious tanks. So, that's just, the Amtrak is this one. You've probably seen it a million times in, like, shows about the Pacific War or games about the Pacific War. And the amphibious tank is like the Sherman DD, which is, just something that can in some way cross river. It's nothing new. We've seen this already a million times in all the different mods. So this is just, it's nothing strange. So you see how they integrate it into the tech tree, which actually, in my opinion, isn't like as good as some of the mods, because some of the mods make them to be modifications to a vehicle rather than a new different type of vehicle altogether. Which, for the Amtraks, sure, but for the amphibious tanks, yeah, I'd probably prefer it to be, a modification of the actual tank, but whatever. And they're also changing around how research bonuses work so that you cannot just, research something in 0 days anymore. Instead, it is a percentage speed modifier, so it stacks better if you have a fast research speed. So, that's pretty good. And, yeah, that's basically, also to reduce the certain tech rush strategies, they're calling it. So, like, in the standard game, I don't play much of the standard game, but obviously there's a lot of ways to optimize the way you're researching things so that, like, for example, you have the best fighter by 1940 or something, and then you can just mass produce that. And then another thing that they're doing is allow certain techs to get a bonus from XP, and that's actually very good because you can see, like, for example, magnetic detonator, you can spend 50 naval experience to boost the research there. And yeah, that's just another good way to get experience to be useful. Then there's the Mexico rework, which is quite interesting. You see the nice focus tree, actually, which is all about which different warlord, caudillo, you are supporting and what you're going to do. Or maybe you're going to just go down full-on Legacy of Revolution or ban political militias, which probably causes a lot of problems. But yeah, essentially, you are trying to either reform the system into, something that kind of resembles democracy, or maybe you're just going on full red or full synarchist, which is just kind of like the Mexican version of fascism. And yeah, so it's a very interesting focus tree because, again, you have to deal with the different caudillos. Now, Mexico at the time was an interesting place because it just emerged from a brutal civil war in the 1910s and 20s. And so the military strongmen were Lázaro Cárdenas, Plutarco Calles, and Saturnino Cedillo. And they essentially kind of fought against each other, but sometimes made deals. Then there was the whole question of the Mexican oil. So it's actually a very interesting focus tree. I'm not going to go too far into the Dev Diary, but just know that it's kind of good. Like, it's honestly ridiculous that Mexico and the Netherlands seem to have the best focus trees pretty much of them all in the base game, which is, well, something else. Looks like they're going with a very Death or Dishonory kind of organization for the focus tree here, because you can have different international alignments that are separate from your ideological outlook, although I'm guessing that obviously, if you're trying to befriend Germany, it would be better to go ahead and do the gold shirts and make synarchism, or maybe just some kind of fascism, great again. But you know, that's it's pretty good. And obviously, there's a pretty good part about military budget review, which is kind of piggybacking off of the not very well known but existing Mexican arms industry. And yeah, so essentially trying to make Mexico a little bit more of a modern country, which it could have definitely been, but you know, things didn't go all that well for Mexico IRL, unfortunately. So the other thing that you need to deal with are the ejidos, which are the biggest states, kind of, you could call them, and the oil. So the Mexican economy is obviously built on partially agrarian landlordism, essentially, which was what the Mexican Revolution was mostly about, although it was it was ignited by political problems with Mexico's old president Huerta, but you know, it's neither here or there. So essentially, you are trying to modernize by state, because that's what happened. The state was kind of a rentier state because of the oil, and so it could build up its own rail network, which was actually done, you know, quite a bit earlier than some other countries. It could build up its own manufacturing district, and so it was a very state capitalist kind of deal. And so obviously the different presidents will have different ideas as to how that works. So the first one is Cardenas, and he's the one that nationalizes things. Then there's Calles, who's just kind of like one of the military, you know, the most brutal military leaders. You can see that he has a minus 25% political advisor cost, because, you know, he's kind of a dick. And then we have Saturnino Cedillo, who I do not know much about, but apparently he was just one of the last caudillos or warlords that was kind of surviving in his own right. But you know, in the end he didn't really do too much. And yeah, then there's the economic development. So yeah, you have the oil, and you can see there's those lovely resource flags that I was talking about. So essentially now there's a mechanic called the resource rights. So I'm guessing that those are concessions that you give to the foreign powers, or that, you know, most likely you have to take away from them at the start. And yeah, so I'm not sure if it's gonna work in that. For example, those 12 units of oil can only be bought by the United States, or if they just show up in the United States. I don't know. I do not know. So it says there that you're extracting 46, you're importing 0, but you still have 23. You're exporting 23, but you still have 23. I still do not know. Apparently free of charge. Okay, never mind. So yeah, it's concessions to Royal Dutch Shell and Standard Oil of California. Obviously, this is going to play a big role, not just in Mexico, but elsewhere as well. So yeah, you're dealing with those industries, and you can see that if you nationalize the oil fields, they may be persuaded to declare war by the oil barons. So yes, some lovely heavy-handed imperialism. And then you have to deal with, you know, your arms industry, your navy, and your diplomatic relations, and nothing really too strange. Now, obviously, there's also the church power mechanic, which is kind of nice. I hope that they add that to a few more countries, you know, how to deal with the church. And yeah, then there's the groups that can rise to power in hand with the church. There's the Catholic conservatives, you know, quote-unquote democracy, and synarchists. Now, the synarchists is kind of the, you know, Mexican version of fascism, and it's clerical fascism. It's called clerical fascism, which is the same thing that sometimes it's the same kind of system that sometimes is used. Well, it's used to describe sometimes the system in Spain and Portugal, IRL. So obviously, heavy church support, and you know, trying to build a kind of glorious church state, essentially. And yeah, the army is divided between the different factions, and then you can, so it's just a whole lot of a game about how you're going to be playing off internal rivalries, which is kind of nice. Or you can just go Trotskyist, because obviously, you know, very well known part of Mexican history during the time period was Trotsky's exile there. And yeah, he can become the leader of Mexico, because why the hell not, and strike the degenerated worker state, aka the Soviet Union, and he gets the exiled revolutionary spirit. I wonder if somehow you use Mexico to defeat the Soviet Union and you actually defeat them. I wonder if you can switch to the Soviet Union or something. I don't know. And then you can spread, not syndicalism, I'm in Kaiserreich mode, socialism to Latin America. Or as a right wing, you can support Hispanism, which is obviously the concept of the unity of the Hispanic countries of Latin America. That's why it's Latin America, by the way. And it can either be a diplomatic offensive or a military takeover, which is going to lead you to integrate these countries. You can see a revolutionary fight in order to overthrow corrupt governments rewards us for control over entire countries. The inhabitants of those regions have only known oppression, and in order to enjoy true liberation, they must be incorporated into the blank. So yeah. Yeah, essentially, you can be a big dick, or you can even take over the Panama Canal. It's called Operation Just Cause, which is kind of nice. And yeah, so it's the final focus tree for Men and Guns, and it looks like it's gonna be fun. Most likely, it's gonna. Oh, there's also something interesting over there. Look at that oil interface. 34 days of oil left. So yeah, it's very, very good. They're telling you not like how many units of oil you have, but how many days of oil you have left. So that's really good. Doesn't, you know, it makes it so it's not necessary for you to puzzle that out yourself. Because that's in the end what you want. And the most interesting one is the naval changes. The naval changes are mostly about this time. They're talking about mostly changes to the way spotting works, which is actually the most important thing, because spotting in and of itself, you could make a whole just giant history documentary about naval spotting in the Second World War. Especially obviously before radar becomes really important, but you know, just throughout the war, the way navies sort of jockeyed for position was really more than half the battle, and it's really interesting to kind of go into the tactical, not only into the technicalities, but also in the way that the spotting shaped the tactical and strategic thinking of admirals and led to, you know, how fleets positioned for important battles. You know, the most obvious example of that is our Coral Sea and Midway, where you have that carrier warfare was still very undeveloped, and in the end you have just absolute messes of battles because of the way that the navies kind of failed at spotting, or succeeded at spotting in the case of Midway for the Americans. So yeah, it's an important, you know, topic. I'm not going to talk in depth about it right now, but hey, if there's like demand for it, I might do a video on it. There's a few books that do go into quite a lot of detail about it, and it's really, really good. So you can see that there's a new interface, which is kind of interesting. You can see like the weather effects. There's something about upgrades maybe, or maybe experience. On the side, you can detach ships for repair just like you have normally. And then you can see that the fleet missions are changed. There's troop transport, escort maybe. There's mining, demining. There's obviously convoy escort, convoy raiding, quote-unquote search and destroy, which has been renamed to not task force, but like strike force. And then there's patrolling, and then there's something about repairing. And you can see that every fleet is integrated into a task force. Every fleet is now a kind of army group of task forces, which are what we now call fleets in normal Hearts of Iron. You see there's a bunch of settings. And yeah, so it's essentially the same thing as the It's the same thing as the way army groups and armies work, except there's one admiral that controls the entire fleet, and it doesn't seem like there's an admiral for the task forces, but that's fine. Yeah, and you can see that the interface there has the number of capital ships and the number of escorts, so that you can keep track of that really easily. So essentially the fleets can have different missions, and then inside there, the task forces will have their own individual missions, and yeah, that's pretty much what you'd expect. There's a lot of mechanics around oil, around how you can sort of conserve oil, because obviously fleets are very oil expensive, and that ties into the new search and destroy. So the old search and destroy has been renamed Strike Force, which is the Strike Force task force will sit in port, and then once the patrol task forces spot something, or maybe the radars or maybe the aircraft spot something, they're gonna sally out of the port and attack. And this is relatively realistic, especially for fleets like Britain, or definitely for Italy, because Italy had serious oil troubles. And so yeah, essentially most of the naval war for Italy was just kind of like ships sitting in port and then sallying out.
So the whole idea is that, you have that happen, and it's not really that ships are just searching the sea the entire time. And, yeah, then they get called in unless the battle's a pushover for the patrol group, and yeah, that's that. Yeah, okay, so essentially the other thing that they're doing is obviously that they're making combat more about composition rather than just sending in all the ships. What I mean by that is that essentially combat's going to be a little bit quicker as far as I know. Yeah, there's going to be a delay for ships that are coming in as reinforcements progressively, as more task forces get involved, like a coordination penalty, because for that reason you have shorter battles, and then you can clear the field with whatever opposition you have at the moment, and then be done with it, and then run away. So yeah, that's probably about it. So I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.